October 20th, 2010, the San Siro, Milan. Tottenham Hotspur had arrived in Italy for a Champions League group stage fixture against the holders, Inter Milan, the reigning European champions, assembled at enormous cost, managed by Jose Mourinho and anchored at right back by a man widely considered the finest player in his position on earth. His name was Maicon. He had just been named in the FIFA World 11. He was, by consensus of coaches, analysts and opposition players alike, essentially unbeatable in individual defensive situations. Over the course of 90 minutes, a 21-year-old from Cardiff ran past him as though he was standing still. Not once, not twice, 3 times, in 3 separate passages of play, with gathering, almost contemptuous ease. Tottenham lost 4-3. The scoreline was somehow irrelevant. What the watching world had just witnessed, in real time with the benefit of replay from every available camera angle, was the formal and undeniable arrival of Gareth Bale. To understand what made that October night so significant, you have to understand where Gareth Bale had come from and how improbable his trajectory had already been before a single television camera turned to follow him. He was born in Cardiff and began his professional career at Southampton as a left-back, not a footballer being prepared for transcendence, a teenager learning the architectural constraints of a position designed to defend rather than destroy. He joined Tottenham Hotspur in 2007 at 17, and his early years at White Hart Lane were defined not by brilliance but by an almost comical accumulation of misfortune. During a stretch spanning 3 seasons, Tottenham Hotspur failed to win a single Premier League match in which Gareth Bale played. Teammates quietly avoided being near him before kickoff. The suggestion, offered with varying degrees of affection, was that he was cursed. What those years concealed was a quality that Harry Redknapp could identify with absolute clarity. In the summer of 2009, the Tottenham manager told Bale something that would permanently alter the course of his career: that he was not a fullback, but a weapon, and that the position he had been occupying was a cage, not a role. The effect was immediate. Converted to left winger with license to attack and the physical tools to do so at a speed that most opposition right backs found genuinely alarming, Bale became something the Premier League had rarely encountered: not merely fast, but directional, committed in every single situation to running directly at the man in front of him, regardless of what had happened the time before. It is, on paper, an unsophisticated quality. In practice, executed at that velocity against defenders of that caliber, it bordered on the unreasonable. By the spring of 2013, he had won the PFA Players Player of the Year award for the 2nd consecutive season, the first player in the award's history to achieve that distinction. That summer, Real Madrid paid Tottenham Hotspur £85.3 million to bring him to the Bernabéu. A world record, the most expensive footballer on earth. He was 24 years old. What followed was, by any honest measure, extraordinary. He was central to Real Madrid's victory in the 2014 Champions League final, contributing a crucial headed equaliser against Atletico Madrid before extra time as they claimed La Decima, their first European title in 12 years. He was instrumental in back-to-back European triumphs in 2016 and 2017, and in the 2018 final against Liverpool in Kyiv, he came off the bench as a substitute and scored twice. The second, a bicycle kick of such technical perfection that it was immediately placed among the greatest individual moments in Champions League history. By the time he left Madrid, he had accumulated 5 European Cup winners' medals, more than any British player in the history of the competition. But none of that is the story that Real Madrid chose to tell about him. On the night of that bicycle kick in Kyiv, Gareth Bale stated plainly and without any apparent bitterness that his manager, Zinedine Zidane, did not say a single word to him about it. Not in the dressing room, not on the journey home, not at any point thereafter. That silence was not a small thing. It was the most precise and revealing measurement available of a relationship that had been deteriorating for 2 years and whose collapse, when it arrived publicly, would not simply end Bale's time at Real Madrid. It would attempt to rewrite permanently the entire story of who he was. Zidane had taken charge of Real Madrid in January 2016, and the early months of their working relationship were, by all accounts, functional. But doubts emerged quickly, and in that particular institutional environment, doubts calcify with a speed that leaves almost no room for recovery. Bale's injuries had always been a defining feature of his time at the club. Calf problems, knee surgeries, muscular strains accumulated over years until the numbers became impossible to ignore. Over the course of his Real Madrid career, he missed more than 1 in every 3 matches through injury. For a manager who required certainty, Bale represented a persistent and unresolvable variable. And so, gradually, the tactical decisions began to communicate what the private conversations apparently could not. He was dropped, recalled, dropped again. The narrative transmitted through the Bernabéu, through press conferences, through the language of substitutions and squad omissions, was that Gareth Bale was a player who could not be trusted to be present when the stakes were highest. The irony of that verdict, delivered to a man who had played through injuries that kept less driven players sidelined for months, appeared to trouble no one in a position to address it. By the summer of 2019, Zidane had abandoned any interest in diplomatic language. Asked directly about Bale's future, he told reporters that it would be better for everyone if the Welshman left the club. Not a carefully managed withdrawal of confidence, a direct public dismissal, delivered to a player still under contract, still training every day at the club's facilities, and still drawing a reported £500,000 per week from an institution that had now decided, very loudly, but it no longer wanted him. 3 months later, in November 2019, Wales qualified for the European Championship. After the decisive result, Bale was photographed celebrating alongside his international teammates behind a flag that read Wales, Golf, Madrid, in that order. The Spanish press responded with the furious certainty that only a pre-existing narrative can produce. Here, finally, was the evidence. Here was Bale, confirming everything they had suspected, that his club, the institution that had paid a world record fee for him, ranked below a hobby and a national team in his personal order of priorities. It was, on examination, a flag made by a Welsh supporters group that had been carried at international matches for years before that photograph was taken. Bale had not commissioned it. He had not designed it. He had not, at any point, said anything that supported the interpretation being placed upon it. He had simply been standing in the right place at the wrong moment, and the photograph had done the rest. Years later, in a GQ interview, Bale addressed it with a directness that had always been one of his more underappreciated qualities. He played golf, he said, once every 2 to 3 weeks, always on his day off, never before a match. I was hard done by, he said. People created a character that I'm not. I was probably guilty of not defending myself. Football, however, does not pause for corrections. The character had been established, the verdict had been delivered, and the institution that had once paid a world record fee to acquire him had spent the better part of 3 years engineering the conditions of his departure, rather than honestly examining whether it had ever built the right environment for him to succeed. Gareth Bale retired from football in January 2023. The final years had taken him back to Tottenham on loan, briefly to Los Angeles FC, and ultimately to the tournament that mattered most, the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, where he represented a Wales team competing on football's largest stage for the first time since 1958. For a generation of Welsh supporters who had grown up believing that moment would never come, its emotional weight exceeded anything a result alone could measure. He left the game with 5 Champions League medals. He had scored in 2 separate European Cup finals. He was, on his best days, and the best days were genuinely historic, among the most physically formidable and technically precise attacking players his generation produced. The story that football chose to tell about him was about a flag and a golf course, and a man whose commitment was perpetually in question. That story was always more convenient than it was accurate. It served a Spanish press that had elevated him to an altitude no footballer could sustainably occupy, and then needed an explanation when the elevation collapsed. It served an institution that found it considerably easier to place the failure in a man's character than to examine its own structural decisions, the management of his injuries, the public withdrawal of support, the very deliberate nature of his marginalisation. Gareth Bale never arrived in Madrid seeking to be a Galactico. He arrived to play football. He played it when his body allowed, at the very highest level. He was brave to a degree that repeatedly cost him months of his career. He gave Real Madrid 5 European Cups. He gave Wales 64 years of waiting brought to an end. Football told you he was the golfer. The record says something else entirely. Thank you for watching Final Whistle Stories. If this documentary resonated with you, subscribe for more untold realities of the beautiful game. Until next time.